The winds over the Sahel have changed their course. They no longer carry the dust of submission, but the breath of defiance. From a land once branded the region of hunger, now echoes the thunder of a new generation people who refuse to bow before destinies written by others. At the heart of the storm stands Ibrahim Traoré, the man they call the young flame of Burkina Faso. He does not speak the language of the old powers. He speaks with the heartbeat of a people once strangled into silence. When he rose, all of Africa held its breath, because everyone knew some winds only carry dust, but some carry revolution. And this time, the Sahel is not just stirring. It is awakening. To understand the flame called Ibrahim Traoré, you must look into the ashes that fed it. The Sahel is not just a land of sand and wind, it is a graveyard of betrayed dreams. Here, Africa's history was written in the blood of those who dared to say no, and were silenced for it. Patrice Lumumba, the first man to demand Congo for the Congolese, was bound and shot before his country could take its first free breath. Thomas Sankara, son of Burkina Faso, dreamed of an Africa that would never beg for aid and was cut down by his own comrades in a quiet coup. And Muammar Gaddafi, who once declared, "If Africa's gold belongs to Africa, the world will tremble," paid for that vision with his life. But those names never died in the heart of the Sahel. They became silent sentinels guarding every grain of sand, every drop of sweat. In poor villages, elders still tell their stories as if they were saints betrayed by their disciples. Every generation grows up hearing the same warning: freedom is a road with no return. And within that warning, Traoré found his destiny. When he was still a captain, no one believed that this young man could one day lead a nation, yet in his eyes burned a familiar light, the same one seen in Sankara's, stubborn, pure, and unyielding. He did not learn from lectures on politics, but from the silence of the poor, from the calloused hands carrying water under the noon sun, from children growing up in red dust yet still singing songs of freedom. To him, independence is not a holiday. It is a discipline forged daily through labor, vigilance, and memory. "We have won the flag," he once said, "but we have not yet reclaimed the right to dream." Those words rang like bells in the night, because deep inside millions of African hearts lives a quiet fear that history is repeating itself, that the old flames have died and the new one will be extinguished before it fully burns. But there is one thing the old empires never understood: the ashes of the Sahel never cool. Each time a revolutionary falls, a child learns how to rise. Each time a nation is forced to kneel, a new generation swears never to bow again. And from those ashes, the flame called Ibrahim Traoré was born not to glorify the past, but to finish what it left undone. When he stepped onto the stage of power, many sneered, calling him a young copy of those who failed. But they forgot one truth sometimes: the youngest flame is the only one stubborn enough to survive. For in the winds of the Sahel, where so many dreams lie buried, an old vow rises once more. We have lost the fathers of freedom, but their path remains. And that is where the fire begins, in silent graves, in unhealed memories, and in the unbroken faith that no matter how many times it is betrayed, Africa will always find its way back to itself. When Ibrahim Traoré appeared on national television on a September night in 2022, the world barely noticed. But in Burkina Faso, millions held their breath. Dressed in a worn military uniform, speaking with quiet gravity, he did not sound like a politician. He spoke like a man who had endured enough. "We are not fighting only against terrorism," he declared. "We are fighting against a system built to keep Africa weak." What seemed like a single act of defiance became the opening of a new era. Traoré began dismantling the chains his predecessors had not finished breaking. He scrapped unequal military treaties and demanded a full review of every resource contract controlled by foreign powers. Western delegations reacted with outrage, yet in the red dust markets, in army camps along the borders, people began to feel something stirring, a change that was not in slogans, but in their heartbeat. Every word he spoke echoed beyond the halls of power, reaching into ordinary homes. If we do not own our land, who will defend it? If we do not feed our people, who will feed us? Those questions shook a nation awake from a long dream of dependence. In Ouagadougou, students painted his portrait beside Sankara's, calling him the torchbearer of an unfinished flame. In rural villages, farmers raised the red, green, gold flag once again above their roofs, a quiet sign that they stood with a new Burkina Faso, self-reliant, proud, unbroken. But change never comes without cost. The old powers struck back, aid was frozen, contracts withdrawn, and global media branded him the reckless soldier. Online smear campaigns painted him as violent, authoritarian, power-hungry. Yet amid the storm, he spoke words that many would never forget. They can buy the pen, but they cannot buy the truth. They can threaten one man, but they cannot threaten a people that has awakened. That was the moment the flame leapt beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In Mali, Niger, and Chad nations, long trapped in the same circle of dependence, people began to speak of the Traoré effect. For the first time in decades, the Sahel was no longer spoken of in fear, but in hope. Today, every step he takes, every word he speaks, belongs not just to one nation, but to an entire continent that has suffered too long and is now rewriting its own story. Yet no fire burns forever, unless it is fed. Revolution cannot rest on one man's shoulders, it must be carried by a generation. So if you are hearing these words, remember this: history never rewrites itself. It is written by those who dare to believe they have a place in it. The winds of the Sahel are rising again, and this time they are not just sweeping through Burkina Faso. They are searching for the hearts brave enough to keep the flame alive before it is extinguished once more. As the dust of chaos slowly settled, Burkina Faso entered what history would later call the fortress era. Ouagadougou began to change day by day. Streets once crowded with yellowed taxis now saw armored vehicles rumbling past. Checkpoints rose like new milestones of a nation rebuilding its order. Yet behind the walls of steel was not only fear, it was will. The will to survive in a world surrounded by invisible powers. Traoré called it the Fortress Burkina Doctrine, not a policy, but a philosophy of life. "We do not build walls to isolate," he told his cabinet. "We build shields so we will never bow again." Each ministry was restructured as a link in the nation's defensive chain. The army was retrained faster, more agile, ready to deploy anywhere within half an hour. Senior officials were rotated frequently to prevent the rooting of power. Even the cabinet itself was not exempt from audits of finances and foreign ties. At the same time, the information front became the most dangerous battlefield. The state enforced transparency in funding and banned obscure foreign sponsorships. Dozens of NGOs vanished overnight, prompting international media to decry it as a soft purge. But to the people of Burkina Faso, it was not censorship. It was self-defense. For the first time, they heard their government speak in their own voice through nightly broadcasts where officials explained the nation's situation directly, without the filter of a foreign anchor. From that moment, the concept of security expanded into national consciousness. Schools began teaching sovereignty education. Students learned to distinguish truth from manipulation, to understand global power structures. Volunteer militias in rural areas were trained to guard trade routes, protecting farmers and merchants. Everywhere, the phrase, "vigilance is survival," was painted on walls, printed on flags, repeated like a national creed. Yet with strength came shadow. Vigilance turned into habit and then into a quiet system of surveillance. Journalists measured every word. Activists spoke more cautiously. Citizens, though loyal to their government, began to lower their voices when talking about politics. Freedom, once the goal of the uprising, now had to share space with order and fear. Outside observers called it a democratic regression, but inside, many saw it differently. After years of bombs and chaos, peace, even silent peace, felt like a victory worth the price. "Freedom, too, must be protected," said one teacher. And sometimes the price of safety is silence. Under the golden Sahel dusk, with wind swirling dust around the fortress walls, Ibrahim Traoré understood the paradox unfolding before him. He had saved his country from foreign grip, only to face a subtler challenge: how to preserve the soul of freedom while building walls to defend it. On sleepless nights, he often murmured a line from Sankara: "A revolution needs not only guns, it needs conscience." And he knew, if that conscience were ever lost, then no matter how strong the fortress stood, Burkina Faso would cease to be Burkina Faso. As the red dust settled over the boulevards of Ouagadougou in 2025, Burkina Faso was no longer the isolated nation in the desert. From within the walls of the Fortress Burkina Doctrine, something new was taking shape: the spread of a spirit of self-determination. To the west, Mali began negotiating the withdrawal of foreign troops. To the east, Niger suspended its old military accords. In quiet rooms in Bamako and Niamey, leaders began using two new words: Renaissance Sahelian, the Sahelian Renaissance. Western analysts called it the Traoré effect, but to the people of the region, it was simply the return of dignity. Flags once seen as symbols of defeat now waved again in pride. On Malian radio, a host declared, "Burkina Faso is not just defending itself, they are defending all of us." Around that time, Traoré received secret invitations from neighboring heads of state. The first meeting took place in a small room. No flags, no ceremony, only men who shared the same wounds: poverty, dependence, betrayal. They did not speak of war, they spoke of survival. Together, they agreed to form a new cooperative network, the Sahel Resistance Alliance, to share intelligence, support each other's defense, and, most importantly, manage their natural resources without international intermediaries. On paper, it was just a confidential pact, but in reality, it was a strike at the foundations of global power. For the first time in decades, the Sahel nations told the world, "We do not ask for protection, we protect each other." The Western response was swift. Major newspapers in Paris, Berlin, and Washington warned of the spread of dangerous isolationism. They labeled Traoré the man sowing anti-Western sentiment, but in the cafes of Ouagadougou, people laughed. "If taking care of ourselves means being anti-Western," a soldier said, "then maybe the whole world is rebelling." The new alliance slowly became the backbone of a different order. Russia and Iran offered military technology. Brazil proposed cooperation in agriculture and clean energy. China suggested independent telecommunications and cybersecurity systems. Traoré saw none of this as replacing one power with another, but as a strategy for survival in a world of mutual dependency. "If they close the door," he told his advisors, "we'll build another. If they withdraw their hand, we'll use our own." As penned. Across Africa, universities began teaching the Burkina Faso model not as an economic framework, but as a spiritual declaration that sovereignty cannot be imported. In Dar es Salaam, students painted murals of Traoré beside Sankara. In Kinshasa, conferences were held under the banner, "The future does not need permission." And yet, even under that growing light, shadows lingered. Some nations hesitated, fearing the loss of aid and trade. Some intellectuals asked, if we trade one form of dependency for another, what truly changes? Within Burkina Faso itself, Traoré felt the weight of a continent's hope pressing on his shoulders. Every step he took was no longer mere politics, it was the embodiment of millions of people's faith. One night, standing by his window covered in Sahel dust, he looked north toward the small villages where the wind still carried drumbeats and prayers. "Freedom," he whispered, "is not a door you open once. It is a path you must guard with every step." And in that wind, Burkina Faso moved forward quietly, resolutely carrying a flame spreading across the continent, brilliant yet fragile, fierce yet human. The world had begun to notice. Newspapers that once labeled Burkina Faso an unstable nation now wrote that it was challenging the entire global order. Behind closed doors in Brussels, Washington, and Paris, one name kept surfacing: Traoré. He had become a symbol, though he had never sought the title. And what was once called the Traoré effect was no longer a political phenomenon, it had become a spiritual awakening. Across universities from Lagos to Nairobi, students held sovereignty talks to debate what true independence means. In African villages, elders told children about the small nation that refused to bend. In the Caribbean, social movements began to ask, if they can be free, why can't we? The wave spread far beyond borders. Nations once seen as powerless realized that strength was not found in arsenals, but in the will to never kneel. Yet along with pride came shadow. The more hope the world placed on Burkina Faso, the heavier the weight became. Sanctions tightened, food prices rose, aid was cut. Traoré knew the fight for sovereignty was not just about symbolism, it was a daily struggle to survive. In a closed meeting with his cabinet, he said, "They want us to kneel with empty stomachs, but we will stand with working hands." Under that pressure, the nation began to build with its own strength. Local workshops forged farming tools. Cooperatives took over gold production. Solar projects lit up villages that had long lived in darkness. People stopped waiting for miracles, they made them. A school teacher in Kaya said on the nightly broadcast, "We are poor, but for the first time we are poor in freedom." Her words spread sung in street songs, painted on walls, whispered as a vow of a generation. On the global stage, the great powers still tried to isolate Burkina Faso. But the more they pushed it away, the more visible it became. Each sanction awakened more people, for the world now saw them not as rebels but as a mirror of what other nations had lost: dignity. And perhaps that was Traoré's true victory, not power, but the influence of courage. An influence that needs no declaration, no flag, only the simple truth that one small nation dared to say no, and the world had to listen. Now, as the winds of the Sahel sweep again across the desert, glowing under the setting sun, one question still echoes. Will Fortress Burkina be a beacon of freedom, or a lonely citadel in the sand? The answer lies not in a single leader, but in every person who still believes in their own dignity. If you feel the power of this story, if you believe the world still needs nations and people brave enough to stand tall, leave a comment below. What do you think about the Traoré effect? Is it just a moment, or the dawn of a new era? And if you want to keep following this journey where every story from the Sahel, from Africa, and from the world is told in the light of truth, click subscribe, hit like, and share this video. Because sometimes, all it takes is one click to spread a flame. A small flame, yet strong enough to change the way the world sees freedom.